hello there. Welcome back, everybody. We're going to be reading more of The Hobbit. We made some pretty good progress last time, and we left on quite a cliffhanger, so I'm excited to see what happens next in the story. Whenever I start these things, I always think I'm gonna start the stream talking about a bunch of stuff that I thought I would talk about, like the stuff I thought about throughout the day, but whenever I get here to this specific point, right before we start, I always forget what I wanted to talk about. I started carrying a notepad with me, so hopefully I'll be able to jot down my thoughts throughout the day, and, you know, this predicament will no longer happen. Good evening, James Yeager. Good to see you. We're going to be reading The Hobbit, so let me go ahead and turn off the music. All right. Let me get the book here. Still got it here. Remove the cover and everything. Got my water. My volume is low. Is it low? My levels say it's... I'm looking at my levels. I'm well into the yellow part of the meter. Sounds low. Give me 1 second. Let me see here. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Oh, what the heck? My, I'm transmitting with the wrong mic. What the heck? This happened a long time ago. I'm so glad you told me. Here we go. This must be better. Let me know if this is better. For every now and then that happens, and it really, really messes with me. And I've been checking. Every time I turn my computer on, I check for that. And the one time I don't, it happens. I'm really glad you pointed that out. Thank you so much. This whole stream would have been tainted with bad audio quality if you hadn't have pointed that out. Thank goodness you're here. Well, I just gotta remember to check that again. Let me know if this sounds good. I think it should sound fine now. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing 1, 2, 3. Let me go ahead and check it myself real quick. Testing 1, 2, 3. Test 2, 3. Okay, yeah, that's pretty good. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Thank you so much for pointing that out. Holy cow. I would have hated to go the whole stream with that level of quality. That was terrible. I really gotta keep on checking for that. The one time I don't check. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started with the book. Let me take a swig of water real quick. Oh, almost dropped it. All right. Chapter 16, A Thief in the Night. Now the days passed slowly and wearily. Many of the dwarves spent their time piling and ordering the treasure, and now Thorin spoke of the Arkenstone of Thrain, and bade them eagerly to look for it in every corner. "For the Arkenstone of my father," he said, "is worth more than a river of gold in itself, and to me it is beyond price. That stone of all the treasure I name unto myself, and I will be avenged on anyone who finds it and withholds it." Bilbo heard these words, and he grew afraid, wondering what would happen if the stone was found, wrapped in an old bundle of tattered oddments that he used as a pillow. All the same, he did not speak of it, for as the weariness of the days grew heavier, the beginnings of a plan had come into his little head. Things had gone on like this for some time, when the ravens brought news that Dain would more than 500 dwarves hurrying from the Iron Hills were now within about 2 days' march of Dale, coming from the northeast. "But they cannot reach the mountain unmarked," said Roak. "I fear lest there be battle in the valley. I do not call this council good. Though they are a grim folk, they are not likely to overcome the host that besets you. And even if they did so, what will you gain? Winter and snow is hastening behind them. How shall you be fed without the friendship and goodwill of the lands about you? The treasure is likely to be your death, though the dragon is no more." But Thorin was not moved. "Winter and snow will bite both men and elves," he said, "and they will find their dwelling in the waste grievous to bear. With my friends behind them and the winter upon them, they will perhaps be in softer mood to parley with." That night, Bilbo made up his mind. The sky was black and moonless. As soon as it was full dark, he went to a corner of an inner chamber just within the gate, drew from his bundle of a rope, and also the Arkenstone wrapped in a rag. Then he climbed to the top of the wall. Only Bombur was there, for it was his turn to watch, and the dwarves kept only one watchman at a time. "It is mighty cold," said Bombur. "I wish we could have a fire up here as they have in the camp." "It is warm enough inside," said Bilbo. "I dare say, but I am bound here till midnight," grumbled the fat dwarf. "A sorry business altogether. Not that I venture to disagree with Thorin. May his beard grow even longer, yet he was ever a dwarf with a stiff neck." "Not as stiff as my legs," said Bilbo. "I am tired of stairs and stone passages. I would give a good deal for the feel of grass on my toes." "I would give a good deal for the feel of a strong drink in my throat, and for a soft bed after a good supper." "I can't give you those while the siege is going on. But it is long since I watched, and I will take your turn for you, if you like. There is no sleep in me tonight." "You are a good fellow, Mr. Baggins, and I will take your offer kindly. If there should be anything to note, rouse me first, mind you. I will lie in the inner chamber to the left, not far away." "Off you go," said Bilbo. "I will wake you at midnight, and you can wake the next watchman." As soon as Bombur was gone, Bilbo put on his ring, fastened the rope, slipped down over the wall, and was gone. He had about 5 hours before him. Bombur would sleep. He could sleep at any time, and ever since the adventure in the forest, he was always trying to recapture the beautiful dreams he had then. And all the others were busy with Thorin. It was unlikely that any, even Fili or Kili, would come out on the wall until it was their turn. It was very dark, and the road after a while when he... It was very dark, and the road after a while when he left the newly made path and climbed down toward the lower course of the stream was strange to him. At last he came to the bend where he had to cross the water, if he was to make for the camp as he wished. The bed of the stream was there shallow but already broad, and fording it in the dark was not easy for the little hobbit. He was nearly across when he missed his footing on a round stone and fell into the cold water with a splash. He had barely scrambled out on the far bank, shivering and spluttering, when up came the elves in a gloom with bright lanterns and searched for the cause of the noise. "That was no fish," one said. "There is a spy about. Hide your lights. They will help him more than us, if it is that queer little creature that is said to be their servant." "Servant indeed," snorted Bilbo. and in the middle of his snort he sneezed loudly, and the elves immediately gathered towards the sound. "Let's have a light," he said. "I am here if you want me." And he slipped off his ring and popped from behind a rock. They seized him quickly, in spite of their surprise. "Who are you? Are you the dwarves' Hobbit? What are you doing? How did you get so far past our sentinels?" they asked one after another. "I am Mr. Bilbo Baggins," he answered, "companion of Thorin, if you want to know. I know your king well by sight, though perhaps he doesn't know me to look at. But Bard will remember me, and it is Bard I particularly want to see." "Indeed," said they, "and what may be your business?" "Whatever it is, it's my own, my good elves. But if you wish ever to get back to your own woods from this cold, cheerless place," he answered, shivering, you will take me along quick to a fire where I can dry, and then you will let me speak to your chiefs as quick as may be. I have only an hour or two to spare." That is how it came about that, some 2 hours after his escape from the gate, Bilbo was sitting beside a warm fire in front of a large tent, and there sat two gazing curiously at him, both the Elven King and Bard. Hobbit in elvish armor, partly wrapped in an old basket, was something new to them. "Really, you know," Bilbo was saying in his best business manner, "things are impossible. Personally, I am tired of the whole affair. I wish I was back in the West in my own home, where folk are more reasonable. But I have an interest in this matter, 1/14th share to be precise, according to a letter which, fortunately, I believe I have kept." He drew from a pocket in his old jacket, which he still wore over his mail, crumpled and much folded, Thorin's letter that had been put under the clock on his mantelpiece in May. "A share in the profits, mind you," he went on. "I am aware of that. Personally, I am only too ready to consider all your claims carefully and deduct what is right from the total before putting in my own claim. However, you don't know Thorin Oakenshield as well as I do now, I assure you. He is quite ready to sit on a heap of gold and starve as long as you sit here." "Well, let him," said Bard. "Such a fool deserves to starve." "Quite so," said Bilbo. "I see your point of view. At the same time, winter is coming on fast. Before long you will be having snow and whatnot, and supplies will be difficult, even for elves, I imagine. Also, there will be other difficulties. You have not heard of Dane and the dwarves of the Iron Hills?" "We have a long time ago. But what has he got to do with us?" asked the king. "I thought as much. I see I have some information you have not. Dane, I may tell you, is now less than 2 days' march off, and has at least 500 grim dwarves with him. A good many of them have had experience in the dreadful dwarf and goblin wars, of which you have no doubt heard. When they arrive, there may be serious trouble." "Why do you tell us this? Are you betraying your friends, or are you threatening us?" asked Bard grimly. "My dear Bard," squeaked Bilbo, "don't be so hasty. I never met such suspicious folk. I am merely trying to avoid trouble for all concerned. Now I will make you an offer." "Let us hear it," they said. "You may see it," said he. "It is this." He drew forth the Arkenstone and threw away the wrapping. The Elven King himself, whose eyes were used to things of wonder and beauty, stood up in amazement. Even Bard gazed marveling at it in silence. It was as if a globe had been filled with moonlight and hung before them in a net woven of the glint of frosty stars. "This is the Arkenstone of Thrain," said Bilbo, "the heart of the mountain, and it is also the heart of Thorin. He values it above a river of gold. I give it to you. It will aid you in your bargaining." And Bilbo, not without a shudder, nor without a glance of longing, handed the marvelous stone to Bard. He held it in his hand as though dazed. "How is it yours to give?" he asked at last with an effort. "Oh, well," said the hobbit uncomfortably, "it isn't exactly, but, well, I'm willing to let it stand against all my claim, don't you know? I may be a burglar, or so they say. Personally, I never really felt like one. But I am an honest one, I hope, more or less. Anyway, I'm going back now. The dwarves can do what they like to me. I hope you will find it useful." The Elven King looked at Bilbo with a new wonder. "Bilbo Baggins," he said, "you are more worthy to wear the armor of elf princes than many that have looked more comely in it. But I wonder if Thorin Oakenshield will see it so. I have more knowledge of dwarves in general than you have, perhaps. I advise you to remain with us, and here you shall be honored and thrice welcome." "Thank you very much, I am sure," said Bilbo with a bow. "But I don't think I ought to leave my friends like this, after all we have gone through together. And I promised to wake up old Bombwood at midnight, too. Really, I must be going, and quickly." Nothing they could say would stop him, so an escort was provided for him, and as he went, both the king and Bard saluted him with honor. As they passed through the camp, an old man wrapped in a dark cloak rose from a tent door where he was sitting and came towards them. "Well done, Mr. Baggins," he said, clapping Bilbo on the back. "There is always more about you than anyone expects." It was Gandalf. For the first time for many a day, Bilbo was really delighted. But there was no time for all the questions that he immediately wished to ask. "All in good time," said Gandalf. "Things are drawing towards the end now, unless I am mistaken. There is an unpleasant time just in front of you, but keep your heart up. You may come through all right. There is news brewing that even the ravens have not heard. Good night." Puzzled, but cheered, Bilbo hurried on. He was guided to a safe ford and set across dry, and then he said farewell to the elves and climbed carefully back toward the gate. Great weariness began to overcome him, but it was well before midnight when he clambered up the rope again. It was still where he had left it. He untied it, hid it, then he sat down on the wall and wondered anxiously what would happen next. At midnight he woke up Bombur, then in turn rolled himself up in his corner, without listening to the old dwarf's thanks, which he felt he had hardly earned. He was soon fast asleep, forgetting all his worries till the morning. As a matter of fact, he was dreaming of eggs and bacon. Chapter 17. The Clouds Burst. Next day, the trumpets rang early in the camp. Soon a single runner was seen hurrying along the narrow path. At a distance he stood and hailed them, asking whether Thorin would now listen to another embassy, since new tidings had come to hand, and matters were changed. "That will be Dane," said Thorin when he heard. "They will have got wind of his coming. I thought that would alter their mood. Bid them come few in number and weaponless, and I will hear," he called to the messenger. About midday the banners of the forest and the lake were seen to be borne forth again. A company of 20 was approaching. At the beginning of the narrow way they laid aside sword and spear, and came on toward the gate, wondering. The dwarves saw that among them were both Bard and the Elven King, before whom an old man wrapped in cloak and hood bore a strong casket of iron-bound wood. "Hail, Thorin," said Bard. "Are you still of the same mind?" "My mind does not change with the rising and setting of a few suns," answered Thorin. "Did you come to ask me idle questions? Still the elf host has not departed as I bade. Till when you come in vain to bargain with me. Or till then you come in vain to bargain with me. Is there then nothing for which you would yield any of your gold? Nothing that you or your friends have to offer?" "What of the Arkenstone of Thrain?" said he, and at the same moment the old man opened the casket and held aloft the jewel. The light leapt from his hand, bright and white in the morning. Then Thorin was stricken dumb with amazement and confusion. No one spoke in a long while. Thorin at length broke the silence. His voice was thick with wrath. "That stone was my father's, and is mine," he said. "Why should I purchase my own?" But wonder overcame him, and he added, But how came you by the heirloom of my house? If there is need to ask such a question of thieves. We are not thieves, Bard answered. Your own we will give back in return for our own. How came you by it? Shouted Thorin in gathering rage. I gave it to them, squeaked Bilbo, who was peering over the wall, by now in a dreadful fright. You, cried Thorin, turning upon him and grasping him with both hands. You miserable hobbit! You undersized burglar! He shouted at a loss for words, and he shook poor Bilbo like a rabbit. By the beard of Durin, I wish I had Gandalf here. Curse him for his choice of you. May his beard wither. As for you, I will throw you to the rocks, he cried, and lifted Bilbo in his arms. Stay, your wish is granted, said a voice. The old man with the caskets threw aside his hood and cloak. Here is Gandalf, and none too soon, it seems. If you don't like my burglar, please don't damage him. Put him down and listen first to what he has to say. You all seem in league, said Thorin, dropping Bilbo on top of the wall. Never again will I have dealings with any wizard or his friends. What have you to say, you descendant of rats? Dear me, said Bilbo. I'm sure this is all very uncomfortable. You may remember saying that I might choose my own 14th share. Perhaps I took it too literally. I've been told that dwarves are sometimes politer in word than in deed. The time was all the same when you seemed to think that I had been of some service. Descendant of rats indeed. Is this all the service of you and your family that I was promised, Thorin? Take it that I have disposed of my share as I wished, and let it go at that. I will, said Thorin grimly. I will let you go at that, and may we never meet again. Then he turned and spoke over the wall. I am betrayed, he said. It was rightly guessed that I could not forbear to redeem the Arkenstone, the treasure of my house. For it I will give 1/14th share of the hoard in silver and gold, setting aside the gems, but that shall be accounted and promised share of this traitor, and with that reward he shall depart, and you can divide it as you will. He will get little enough, I doubt not. Take him, if you wish him to live, and no friendship of mine goes with him. Get down now to your friends, he said to Bilbo, or I will throw you down. What about the gold and silver? Asked Bilbo. That shall follow after, as can be arranged, said he. Get down. Until then we keep the stone, cried Bard. You are not making a very splendid figure as king under the mountain, said Gandalf, but things may change yet. They may indeed, said Thorin, and already so strong was the bewilderment of the treasure upon him, he was pondering whether by the help of Dain he might not recapture the Arkenstone and withhold the share of the reward. And so Bilbo was swung down from the wall and departed with nothing for all his trouble, except the armor which Thorin had given him already. More than one of the dwarves in their hearts felt shame and pity at his going. Farewell, he cried to them. We may meet again as friends. Be off, called Thorin. You have mail upon you, which was made by my folk, and it is too good for you. It cannot be pierced by arrows, but if you do not hasten, I will sting your miserable feet. So be swift. Not so hasty, said Bard. We will give you until tomorrow. At noon we will return, and see if you have brought from the hoard the portion that is to be set against the stone. If that is done without deceit, then we will depart, and the elf host will go back to the forest. In the meanwhile, farewell. With that, they went back to the camp, but Thorin sent messengers by Roak, telling Dain of what had passed, bidding him come with wary speed. That day passed, and the night. The next day the wind shifted west, and the air was dark and gloomy. Morning was still early when a cry was heard in the camp. Runners came in to report that a host of dwarves had appeared round the eastern spur of the mountain and was now hastening to Dale. Dane had come. He had hurried on through the night, and so had come upon them sooner than they had expected. Each one of his folk was clad in a hauberk of steel mail that hung to his knees, and his legs were covered with hose of a fine and flexible mail mesh, the secret of whose making was possessed by Dane's people. The dwarves are exceedingly strong for their height, but most of these were strong even for dwarves. In battle they wielded heavy two-handed mattocks. But each of them had also a short broadsword at his side, and a round shield slung at his back. Their beards were forked and plated and thrust into their belts. Their caps were of iron, and they were shod with iron, and their faces were grim. Trumpets called men, and elves to arm. Before long the dwarves could be seen coming up the valley at a great pace. They halted between the river and the eastern spur, but a few held on their way. Crossing the river drew near the camp, and there they laid down their weapons and held up their hands in sign of peace. Bard went out to meet them, and with him went Bilbo. "We are sent from Dane, son of Nain," they said, when questioned. "We are hastening to our kinsmen of the mountain, since we learn that the kingdom of old is renewed. But who are you that sit in the plain as foes before defended walls?" This, of course, in the polite and rather old-fashioned language of such occasions, meant simply, "You have no business here. We are going on, so make way, or we shall fight you." They meant to push on between the mountain and the loop of the river, for the narrow land there did not seem to be strongly guarded. Bard, of course, refused to allow the dwarves to go straight on to the mountain. He was determined to wait until the gold and silver had been brought out in exchange for the Arkenstone, for he did not believe that this would be done if once the fortress was manned with so large and warlike a company. They had brought with them a great store of supplies, for the dwarves can carry very heavy burdens, and nearly all of Dane's folk, in spite of their rapid march, bore huge packs on their backs in addition to their weapons. They would stand a siege for weeks, and by that time yet more dwarves might come, and yet more, for Thorin had many relatives. Also, they would be able to reopen and guard some other gate, so that the besiegers would have to encircle the whole mountain, and for that they had not sufficient numbers. These were, in fact, precisely their plans, for the raven messengers had been busy between Thorin and Dane. But for the moment the way was barred, so after angry words the dwarf messengers retired, muttering in their beards. Bard then sent messengers at once to the gate, but they found no gold or payment. Arrows came forth as soon as they were within shot, and they hastened back in dismay. In the camp all was now astir, as if for battle, for the dwarves of Dane were advancing along the eastern bank. "Fools," laughed Bard, "to come thus beneath the mountain's arm. They do not understand war above ground, whatever they may know of battle in the mines. There are many of our archers and spearmen now hidden in the rocks upon their right flank. Dwarf mail may be good, but they will soon be hard to put it. Let us set on them now from both sides before they are fully rested." But the Elven King said, "Long will I tarry, ere I begin this war for gold. Dwarves cannot pass us unless we will, or do anything that we cannot mark. Let us hope still for something that will bring reconciliation. Our advantage in numbers will be enough, if in the end it must come to unhappy blows." But he reckoned without the dwarves. The knowledge that the Arkenstone was in the hands of the besiegers burned in their thoughts. Also they guessed the hesitation of Bard and his friends, and resolved to strike while they debated. Suddenly, without a signal, they sprang silently forward to attack. Bows twanged and arrows whistled. Battle was about to be joined. Still more suddenly, a darkness came on with dreadful swiftness. A black cloud hurried over the sky. Winter thunder on a wild wind rolled roaring up and rumbled in the mountain, and lightning lit its peak. And beneath the thunder another blackness could be seen whirling forward, but it did not come with the wind. It came from the north, like a vast cloud of birds, so dense that no light could be seen between their wings. "Halt!" cried Gandalf, who appeared suddenly, and stood alone with arms uplifted between the advancing dwarves and the ranks awaiting them. "Halt!" he called in a voice like thunder, and his staff blazed forth with a flash like the lightning. "Dread has come upon you all. Alas, it has come more swiftly than I guessed. The goblins are upon you. Bolg of the North is coming, O Dain, whose father you slew in Moria. Behold, the bats are above his army like a sea of locusts. They ride upon wolves, and wargs are in their train." Amazement and confusion fell upon them all. Even as Gandalf had been speaking, the darkness grew. The dwarves halted and gazed at the sky. The elves cried out with many voices. "Come," called Gandalf. "There is yet time for counsel. Let Dain, son of Nain, come swiftly to us." There's a little star here. It says that Bolg is the son of Azog from page 24. What's on page 24? Is that when they, like... Page 24. That's like, holy cow, that's like from the first chapter. Oh, this... It says here, this is when Gandalf was telling Thorin that his grandfather Thror was killed in the mines of Moria by Azog the Goblin. And Bolg is the son of Azog. That's really interesting. So there's just like goblins, wargs, and bats now. That's crazy. So began a battle that none had expected, and it was called the Battle of Five Armies, and it was very terrible. Upon one side were the goblins and the wild wolves, and upon the other were elves and men and dwarves. This is how it fell out. Ever since the fall of the great goblin of the Misty Mountains, the hatred of their race for the dwarves had been rekindled to fury. Messengers had passed to and fro between all their cities, colonies, and strongholds, for they resolved now to win the dominion of the North. Tidings they had gathered in secret ways, and in all the mountains there was a forging and an arming. Then they marched and gathered by hill and valley, going ever by tunnel or under dark, until around and beneath the great mountain Gundabad of the North, where was their capital, a vast host was assembled ready to sweep down in time to storm unawares upon the south. Then they learned of the death of Smaug, and joy was in their hearts, and they hastened night after night through the mountains and came thus, at last on a sudden, from the north hard on the heels of Dain. Not even the ravens knew of their coming until they came out in the broken lands which divided the lonely mountain from the hills behind. How much Gandalf knew cannot be said, but it is plain that he had not expected this sudden assault. This is the plan that he had made in council with the Elven King and with Bard, and with Dain, for the Dwarf Lord now joined them. The goblins were the foes of all, and at their coming all other quarrels were forgotten. Their only hope was to lure the goblins into the valley between the arms of the mountain, and themselves to man the great spurs that struck south and east. Yet this would be perilous. If the goblins were in sufficient numbers to overrun the mountain itself, and so attack them from behind and above, but there was no time to make any other plan, or to summon any help. Soon the thunder passed, rolling away to the southeast, but the bat cloud came, flying lower over the shoulder of the mountain, and whirling above them, shutting out the light and filling them with dread. "To the mountain!" called Bard. "To the mountain! Let us take our places while there is yet time!" On the southern spur, in its lower slopes, and in the rocks at its feet, the elves were set. On the eastern spur were men and dwarves. But Bard and some of the nimblest of men and elves climbed to the height of the eastern shoulder to gain a view to the north. Soon they could see the lands before the mountain's feet, black with a hurrying multitude. Ere long, an vanguard swirled round to the spur's end and came rushing into Dale. These were the swiftest wolf riders, and already their cries and howls rent the air afar. A few brave men were strung before them to make a feint of resistance, and many there fell before the rest drew back and fled to either side. As Gandalf had hoped, the goblin army had gathered behind the resisted vanguard and poured now in rage into the valley, driving wildly up between the arms of the mountain, seeking for the foe. Their banners were countless, black and red, and they came on like a tide in fury and disorder. It was a terrible battle, the most dreadful of all Bilbo's experiences, and the one which at the time he hated the most, which is to say that it was the one he was most proud of, and most fond of recalling long afterwards, although he was quite unimportant in it. Actually, I may say, he put on his ring early in the business and vanished from sight, if not from all danger. A magic ring of that sort is not a complete protection in a goblin charge, nor does it stop flying arrows and wild spears, but it does help in getting out of the way, and it prevents your head from becoming specially chosen for a sweeping stroke of a goblin swordsman. The elves were the first to charge. Their hatred for the goblins is cold and bitter. Their spears and swords shone in the gloom with a gleam of chill flame, so deadly was the wrath of the hands that held them. As soon as the host of their enemies was dense in the valley, they sent against it a shower of arrows, and each flickered as if with stinging fire. Behind the arrows, 1,000 of their spearmen leapt down and charged. The yells were deafening, the rocks stained black with goblin blood. Just as the goblins were recovering from the onslaught, and the elf charge was halted, there rose from across the valley a deep-throated roar, with cries of Moria and Dane, Dane! The dwarves of the Iron Hills plunged in, wielding their mattocks upon the other side, and besides them came the men of the lake with long swords. Panic came upon the goblins, and even as they turned to meet this new attack, the elves charged again with renewed numbers. Already many of the goblins were flying back down the river to escape from the trap, and many of their own wolves were turning upon them and rending the dead and wounded. Victory seemed at hand, when a cry rang out on the heights above. Goblins had scaled the mountain from the other side, and already many were on the slopes above the gate, and others were streaming down recklessly, heedless of those that fell screaming from the cliff and precipice, to attack the spurs from above. Each of these could be reached by paths that ran down from the main mass of the mountain in the center, and the defenders had too few to bar the way for long. Victory now vanished from hope. They had only stemmed the first onslaught of the black tide. Day drew on. The goblins gathered again in the valley. There a host of wargs came ravening with them, and with them came the bodyguard of Bolg. Is it Bolg or Bulge? Bolg. I don't know. Goblins of huge size with scimitars of steel. Soon actual darkness was coming into a stormy sky, while still the great bats swirled about the heads and ears of elves and men, or fastened vampire-like on the stricken. Now Bard was fighting to defend the eastern spur, and yet giving slowly back. The elf lords were at bay about their king upon the southern arm, near to the watchpost on Ravenhill. Suddenly there was a great shout, and from the gate came a trumpet call. They had forgotten Thorin. Part of the wall, moved by levers, fell outward with a crash into the pool. Out leapt the king under the mountain, and his companions followed him. Hood and cloak were gone, and they were in shining armor, and a red light leapt from their eyes. In the gloom the great dwarf gleamed like gold in a dying fire. Rocks were hurled down from on high by the goblins above, but they held on, leapt down to the false foot, and rushed forward to battle. Wolf and rider fell or fled before them. Thorin wielded his axe with mighty strokes, and nothing seemed to harm him. To me, elves and men! To me, O my kinsfolk! He cried, and his voice shook like a horn in the valley. Down, heedless of order, rushed all the elves of Dane to his help. Down, too, came many of the lakemen, for Bard could not restrain them, and out upon the other side came many of the spearmen of the elves. Once again the goblins were stricken in the valley, and they were piled in heaps till Dale was dark and hideous with their corpses. The wargs were scattered, and Thorin drove right against the bodyguard of Bolg, but he could not pierce their ranks. Already behind him among the goblin dead lay many men and many dwarves, and many a fair elf that should have lived yet long ages merrily in the wood. And as the valley widened, his onset grew ever slower. His numbers were too few, his flanks were unguarded. Soon the attackers were attacked. They were forced into a great ring, facing every way, hemmed all about with goblins and wolves returning to the assault. The bodyguard of Bolg came howling against them, and drove in upon their ranks like waves upon cliffs of sand. Their friends could not help them, for the assault from the mountain was renewed with redoubled force, and upon either side men and elves were being slowly beaten down. On all this Bilbo looked with misery. He had taken his stand on Ravenhill among the elves, partly because there was more chance of escape from that point, and partly, with the more tookish part of his mind, because he was going to be in a last desperate stand. He preferred, on the whole, to defend the elven king. Gandalf, too, I may say, was there, sitting on the ground as if in deep thought, preparing, I suppose, some last blast of magic before the end. That did not seem far off. It will not be long now, thought Bilbo, before the goblins win the gate, and we are all slaughtered or driven down and captured. Really, it is enough to make one weep, after all one has gone through. I would rather old Smaug had been left with all the wretched treasure than all these vile creatures should get it. The poor old Bombord and Balin and Fili and Kili and all the rest come to a bad end. And Bard, too, and the Lakemen and the Merry Elves. Misery me. I have heard songs of many battles, and I have always understood that defeat may be glorious. Scenes very uncomfortable, not to say distressing. I wish I was well out of it. Clouds were torn by the wind. A red sunset slashed the west. Seeing the sudden gleam in the gloom, Bilbo looked round. He gave a great cry. He had seen a sight that made his heart leap. Dark shapes, small yet majestic against the distant glow. "The eagles! The eagles!" he shouted. "The eagles are coming!" Bilbo's eyes were seldom wrong. The eagles were coming down the wind, line after line, in such a host as must has gathered. Sorry. The eagles were coming down the wind, line after line, in such a host as must have gathered from all the eyries of the north. "The eagles! The eagles!" Bilbo cried, dancing and waving his arms. If the elves could not see him, they could hear him. Soon they too took up the cry. It echoed across the valley. Many wandering eyes looked up, and as yet nothing could be seen except from the southern shoulders of the mountain. "The eagles!" cried Bilbo once more, but at the moment a stone hurling from above smote heavily on his helm, and he fell with a crash and knew no more. Bruh. Oh, man. Is this the last chapter? Oh no, there's 2 chapters after this. Okay. I want to keep reading. I think I will leave that. I think I will leave it at that. I think I will leave it on a cliffhanger. That's what I'm gonna do. Because I want to round it off. Two chapters tonight. 2 chapters maybe for the rest of the book. Maybe on Friday, possibly. But yeah. Okay, that was exciting. We got to see like a whole battle. Cool. That's cool that the goblins came back. I wasn't expecting that. Because I remember they mentioned the Battle of the 5 Armies earlier in the book when they met the Eagles, I think. And I was wondering, it's like, okay, there's men, the elves, and the dwarves. Where are the other 2 armies? Because I knew the Battle of the 5 Armies was going to come. And cool, it happened. Interesting. Ooh. I think it's funny that, you know, uh, Bilbo, the main character, is constantly, having bad luck. He sees such a great sight to see the eagles coming, and then then he gets hit in the head with a rock and gets knocked out. But yeah, that's more of The Hobbit. We are almost finished. It's coming soon. The end of the book is almost here. But yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that. Leave it on a cliffhanger. We'll find out what happens to Bilbo and everybody else. What happens to the treasure? I wonder what happens to the treasure. I don't think Bilbo's gonna get much of any of the treasure. He'll get some, I think. I think he'll get some stuff to remember the adventure by. But I don't think he's gonna get, as much as was promised. But yeah, I wonder what will happen. Well, that's the end of the reading for tonight. I hope anybody watching enjoyed. And we will finish probably this Friday. But yeah. Thank you everybody for coming. Oh, one thing I should say about streaming now. I should have said this at the beginning. I think the order of what I'm going to focus on is I'm going to finish The Hobbit. Then I'm going to play Dragon Quest until I'm finished with that. And then I'm going to finish Resident Evil. I put out that poll on what people would like to see me play, and it has been tied between Dragon Quest and Resident Evil for like 2 weeks now. So I think with a draw like that, it only seems fair to finish the series I started first, so that people aren't waiting too long for those to finish, and then continue on with the series I started more recently, which is Resident Evil 4 Remake. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming in. I hope you enjoyed the story. It was kind of intense for a bedtime story, to be honest. It is getting kind of late. But yeah, man, that everyone getting mad did a number on my voice. That was... Glad I have this water here. Alright. Well, that about does it. I'm glad people have watched and enjoyed this story. We will finish it this week. I promise, this week. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful night. Take care. Goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye.